My cousins told everyone the ranch was theirs. What they didn't know was what my grandfather had hidden in the barn beams, and the lawyer who was about to help me find it. The day I turned 18 was the day I ceased to be a problem for the state of California. 2 years in the system, 2 years of being a file in a cabinet, a name on a list. It ended not with a celebration, but with a bus token and a thin manila envelope. Inside was my birth certificate, my social security card, and a letter on heavy cream-colored paper. The letterhead just said, Davies and Associates, Attorneys at Law. It requested my presence at their office on my 18th birthday. Not my attendance, my presence, like I was a ghost being summoned. If you've ever felt like you were starting from zero, with nothing but a key in your hand and a question in your heart, you know the feeling. Hit that subscribe button if you do. We're building a community here for stories just like this one. Stories about starting over. The bus hissed to a stop, the doors sighing open onto a street lined with old brick buildings trying to look modern. Davies and Associates was on the 3rd floor, up a flight of stairs that smelled of floor wax and old paper. The air in the waiting room was still and heavy, like a held breath. A woman with glasses perched on her nose looked up from a thick book, gestured to a leather chair that cracked in protest when I sat down, and then went back to her reading. I sat there for what felt like an hour, the silence broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. It was a slow, deliberate sound, each tick a reminder that my time as a ward of the state was over, and my time as something else had begun. I didn't know what that something else was. I had $57 in my pocket and a duffel bag with 2 changes of clothes and a worn paperback. That was the sum total of my life. The clock ticked. I watched a dust mote dance in a sunbeam slanting through the window. It felt like the only free thing in the room. Finally, a door opened. Mr. Thorne? A man who looked more like a history professor than a lawyer stood in the doorway. He was tall and stooped, with a kind face and tired eyes. This was Arthur Davies. He shook my hand. His grip was firm but dry, like old paper. Leo, please, come in. His office was filled with books. Not just law books, but novels, histories, poetry. They were crammed onto shelves that bowed under their weight, stacked on the floor, spilling from chairs. It felt less like an office and more like a dragon's hoard, but for words instead of gold. He gestured for me to sit, and then he settled behind a massive oak desk that was surprisingly clear of clutter. On its polished surface sat a single thick file. My name was on the tab. Leo Thorne. Happy birthday, Leo, he said, his voice gentle. It was the first time anyone had said it all day. I just nodded, my throat suddenly tight. I wasn't used to kindness from men in suits. I was your grandfather's lawyer, he began, folding his hands on top of the file. And his friend. I've been holding this for you since he passed away 3 years ago. His instructions were very specific. I was not to contact you until you were of legal age and no longer under the care of the state. He slid the file across the desk. It was heavy. I didn't move to take it. My hands were sweating. I wiped them on my jeans. What is it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It's your inheritance, Mr. Davies said. The word hung in the air between us. Inheritance. It sounded like something from a movie, something that happened to other people. People with families. People who weren't me. I thought about my grandfather, a man I barely remembered. I had flashes of him, a memory of a calloused hand holding mine, the smell of sawdust and pipe tobacco, a deep, rumbling laugh. He'd died when I was 15, just after the accident, after my parents were gone. I'd been so lost in my own grief, I hadn't really processed his. The state had become my guardian then, and my grandfather, a man who lived 500 miles away on a piece of land I'd only visited twice, became just another ghost in my life. My grandfather didn't have anything, I said, the words coming out flat and hollow. He was just a farmer. Mr. Davies gave me a small, sad smile. He had the ranch, Leo, Blackwood Ranch, a little over 300 acres in the Sierra foothills. It's been in your family for 4 generations. He paused, letting the weight of that settle. 300 acres. The number was meaningless. I couldn't picture it. The biggest space I'd known for the past 2 years was the shared bedroom in the group home. He left it to you, Mr. Davies continued. All of it. My heart started to beat a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. It felt like a trap. Nothing in my life had ever been given freely. Everything came with a price, with strings, with a form you had to sign in triplicate. Why? I asked. Why me? What about my cousins? My aunt, my mother's sister, had 2 sons, Mark and David. They were older than me, shadows from family gatherings long ago. I remembered them as loud and rough, always breaking things. After the accident, my aunt had made it clear she couldn't take me in. Not enough room, not enough money. The words had been polite, but the meaning was clear. I was not her problem. Mr. Davies' expression tightened. This was the part he wasn't looking forward to. That, he said, tapping the file, is the complicated part. Your grandfather's will is unconventional. He stipulated that the ranch and all its assets belong to you. However, he also included a clause allowing your cousins, Mark and David, to live on the property and manage it until you came of age. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. They've been living there for the past 3 years. They were notified last week that the ownership would legally transfer to you today. They are contesting the will. Of course they were. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my chest, but I swallowed it down. They say your grandfather was not of sound mind when he wrote it, Mr. Davies said, his voice carefully neutral. They claim he was being manipulated, that he always intended for them to inherit. Their lawyer has filed a petition. It's a mess, Leo. A mess. My entire life was a mess. This was just a new, more complicated layer on top of all the others. So what happens now? I asked. I felt tired, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. I just wanted to go somewhere quiet and be invisible for a while. Now you have a choice, he said, leaning forward. His eyes were sharp, focused. Your cousins have made an offer. They're willing to buy you out. $100,000, cash. You sign over your claim and you walk away. You can start a new life, go to college, do whatever you want. It's a clean break. $100,000. It was more money than I could even imagine. It was an escape. It was a ticket to a life where I didn't have to worry about where my next meal was coming from, where I could have a room of my own, a door I could lock. It was everything I thought I wanted. Or, I asked, because I could hear the unspoken word hanging in the air. Or, Mr. Davies said, his gaze unwavering, you fight for it. You go there. The will states you have the right to reside on the property immediately. You go to Blackwood Ranch, and you claim what's yours. But I have to warn you, it won't be easy. They will not make it easy for you. He opened the file. Inside were photos, a simple white farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a big red barn with a sagging roof, fields that rolled away into hills dotted with oak trees. It looked like a postcard from a time that didn't exist anymore. It looked like peace. And it was supposed to be mine. "There's one more thing," Mr. Davies said, his voice dropping lower. "Your grandfather's will is very precise. It's full of odd instructions. He talks about property lines, water rights, things like that. But there's a final section, a sort of addendum, that his own lawyer at the time called unusual and likely unenforceable. It's why your cousins think they have a case." He pulled out a single sheet of paper. "It's a riddle of a sort." He wrote, "The true deed to this land isn't paper. It's wood and iron and memory. It rests where the summer sun sets, in the heart of the ranch." He looked at me over the top of the paper. "His lawyer thought he was losing his mind, but your grandfather was the sanest man I ever knew. He never did anything without a reason." The heart of the ranch. The words meant nothing to me. It sounded like the ramblings of an old man. Maybe the cousins were right. $100,000 was real. A riddle was just words. But then I looked at the picture of the farmhouse, and I thought of that calloused hand holding mine. I remembered the smell of sawdust, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than numb. It was a tiny spark, a flicker of something that might have been anger, or maybe hope. I wasn't sure which. "I want to go there," I said, the words surprising me as much as they did Mr. Davies. He smiled, a genuine, relieved smile that reached his tired eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. "Your grandfather was a good man, Leo. He believed in you. He said you had more steel in you than anyone knew." He handed me a bus ticket and a thick envelope. "This is for expenses, a stipend from the estate. It's not much, but it'll get you started. The bus leaves in an hour. It's a long ride." The bus ride was a journey through worlds. We left the smog and concrete of the city behind, climbing into rolling hills that were brown and dry from the summer heat. The landscape slowly softened, the brown giving way to the green of irrigated fields and the dark, deep green of ancient oaks. I watched the world go by, my reflection a ghostly presence in the window. I felt like a ghost, a boy out of time, heading toward a past I couldn't remember and a future I couldn't imagine. I thought about the choice I'd made. The smart choice, the safe choice, was the money. $100,000 could buy a lot of security. It could erase the constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been my companion for years. But it felt like a betrayal of a man I barely knew, and a betrayal of some part of myself I was only just beginning to recognize, the part of him that Mr. Davies called steel. We passed through small towns with names like Harmony and Pleasant Valley, places that looked like they hadn't changed in 50 years. The people who got on and off the bus had weary, sun-creased faces. They carried grocery bags and wore work boots. This was a different California from the one I knew. This was a place where life was slower, harder, tied to the land. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the bus driver called out, "Blackwood Road!" I grabbed my duffel bag and walked to the front, my legs stiff from the long ride. The doors opened onto a two-lane country road. There was no station, no shelter, just a dusty patch of gravel on the shoulder. Across the road, a rusted metal archway stood between two stone pillars. In faded, peeling letters it read, Blackwood Ranch. This was it. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing around a curve, leaving me in a profound and sudden silence. The only sound was the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind through the tall, dry grass. The air smelled of dust and pine and something else, something wild and clean. I stood there for a long time, just breathing it in. I walked under the archway and started down the long gravel driveway. It was nearly a mile to the house, the road flanked by old, neglected fences. The fields on either side were overgrown with weeds. Here and there, I could see the remnants of what must have been an orchard, the trees gnarled and untended. It was a place that had been left to itself, a place that was waiting. Waiting for what, I didn't know. As I rounded the final bend, I saw them. The house and the barn, just like in the pictures, silhouetted against the dying light. Lights were on in the house, casting a warm, yellow glow from the windows. It looked welcoming, but I knew it wasn't. A beat-up pickup truck was parked out front, and as I got closer, the front door opened. Two men stepped out onto the porch, Mark and David. They were bigger than I remembered, thick-set and hard-looking. They stood with their arms crossed, blocking the way. They looked like they'd been waiting for me. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Mark said, a smirk on his face. He was the older one, with a receding hairline and a mean-looking glint in his eyes. David, standing beside him, was quieter, but he had the same watchful, unfriendly expression. "City boy comes to play farmer." "I'm Leo," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering. "This is my property." Mark laughed, a short, ugly sound. "That's what the paper says. Paper can burn. You shouldn't be here, kid." "The will says I have a right to be here," I said, quoting Mr. Davies. "You can talk to my lawyer if you have a problem with it." I held out the letter from Davies, my hand shaking slightly. David took a step forward and snatched it from my hand. He glanced at it and then crumpled it into a ball, tossing it into the dirt. "Lawyers," he spat, the word an insult. "This is our home. We've been working this land while you were, wherever you were. You got no claim here." "That's not for you to decide," I said. I could feel the anger, cold and sharp, rising in my chest. For 2 years, I had let people decide things for me. Caseworkers, judges, house parents. I was done with it. Mark took a step closer, crowding me. He was a good 6 inches taller than me, and he smelled of beer and sweat. "Listen to me, city boy. We're giving you a gift. 100 grand. You take it, and you disappear. You don't, and things are gonna get uncomfortable." His voice was low and menacing. It was a threat, plain and simple. I thought about the $57 in my pocket. I thought about the years of being powerless, of being pushed around. I looked past him at the house, my house, and I felt that flicker of steel inside me again. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm staying in the guest room." For a moment, I thought he was going to hit me. His hands clenched into fists, and his face got red. But then David put a hand on his arm. "Let him," David said, his eyes cold and calculating. "Let him stay. He'll see. He won't last a week." Mark unclenched his fists. He gave me one last look of pure hatred, and then turned and stomped back into the house, slamming the door behind him. David just stared at me for a long moment. "The guest room's in the back," he said, his voice flat. "Don't touch anything." Then he followed his brother inside. I was left alone on the driveway as darkness fell completely. The silence returned, deeper this time, more menacing. I picked up my duffel bag and walked around the side of the house. The guest room was a small, sad-looking addition built onto the back porch. It was little more than a shed with a single window and a rickety door. Inside, there was a narrow cot, a dusty dresser, and a bare light bulb hanging from a wire. It was cold. The window was cracked, and a draft snaked its way in. This wasn't a guest room. It was a punishment. I sat down on the cot, the springs groaning in protest. I could hear their muffled voices from the main house, angry and loud. I was an invader in my own home. I lay back on the lumpy mattress, my hands behind my head, and stared up at the water-stained ceiling. What have I gotten myself into? The $100,000 seemed like a lost paradise, a beautiful dream I'd stupidly walked away from. Here, there was just dust and cold, and the animosity of two men who wanted me gone. I closed my eyes and tried to remember my grandfather's face, but all I could summon was the feeling of his hand, big and warm, holding mine. It wasn't much, but right then, it was all I had. The first few days were a war of attrition, a cold, quiet war. My cousins ignored me completely, acting as if I didn't exist. They would walk past me in the yard without a word, their faces set like stone. They ate their meals in the main house, the smell of bacon and coffee wafting out in the mornings, while I ate cold cereal from a box with milk I bought in town. The guest room had no heat, and the nights in the foothills were cold. I slept in my clothes, huddled under a single thin blanket. They made it clear, in 1,000 small ways, that I was not welcome. The hot water would be off when I tried to use the outdoor spigot to wash my face. The gate at the end of the driveway would be chained, forcing me to walk the 2 miles into the small town for supplies. They were trying to wear me down, to make me so miserable that I would take their money and run. And some days, it almost worked. The loneliness was a physical weight. I had no one to talk to, nothing to do. I was a prisoner on my own land. But every time I thought about quitting, I would remember Mr. Davies' words. He said you had more steel in you than anyone knew. And I would walk. I started exploring the ranch, systematically. I needed to understand the place, to feel it under my feet. I walked the fence lines, my hands tracing the weathered wood and rusted barbed wire. I climbed the hills, pushing through thickets of manzanita and scrub oak, until I could look down and see the whole valley spread out below me. The house, the barn, the fields, all of it. From up there, it looked so peaceful. It was hard to believe it was a battlefield. The land was beautiful, but neglected. The fields were fallow, the irrigation ditches choked with weeds. The orchard was a tangle of dead branches. It was a place that was dying of heartbreak, of inattention. My cousins weren't farmers, they were squatters. They were living off the remnants of what my grandfather had built, selling off equipment, letting the place fall into ruin. The more I saw, the angrier I got. This wasn't just about a house or a piece of land. It was about a legacy. It was about everything my grandfather had worked for, his whole life, being allowed to crumble into dust. My explorations always ended at the same place, the barn. It was a massive structure, the heart of the ranch. Its red paint was faded and peeling, its roof sagging in the middle like the spine of an old horse. But it was still standing, proud and defiant. The big sliding doors groaned in protest when I pushed them open. The air inside was thick with the smell of old hay, dust, and time. Sunbeams lanced through the gaps in the siding, illuminating a universe of swirling dust motes. It was a cathedral of a place, quiet and solemn. Most of the stalls were empty. A few held rusting pieces of old farm equipment, skeletons of a bygone era. In the corner, there was a small workshop, my grandfather's. A thick layer of dust covered everything. A workbench stood against one wall, tools still hanging on a pegboard above it, each in its perfect designated spot. A rusty coffee can was filled with nails and screws. An old radio sat on a shelf, its cord frayed. I ran my hand over the workbench, the wood worn smooth by years of use. I could almost feel him there, see him standing in this very spot, his hands shaping wood or fixing a piece of machinery. This was his place. And I kept coming back to the riddle. The true deed to this land isn't paper. It's wood and iron and memory. It rests where the summer sun sets, in the heart of the ranch. The barn was the heart of the ranch. I was sure of it. But what was the heart of the barn? I spent days searching. I looked in every stall, every feed bin, every corner of the tack room. I climbed up into the hayloft, the old ladder creaking under my weight. The loft was vast and empty, a cavern of shadows. I walked its length, my footsteps echoing in the silence, my eyes scanning the floorboards, the walls, the massive beams that supported the roof. Nothing. I felt like I was chasing a ghost, following the nonsensical words of an old man. Maybe my cousins were right. Maybe he had lost his mind. Maybe the pressure and the loneliness were getting to me, making me see significance where there was none. I was about to give up, to head back to my cold little room and admit defeat. But as I turned to leave the loft, the late afternoon sun shifted. A single golden beam of light shot through a crack in the western wall, hitting one of the main support beams dead center. It was the beam that ran right down the middle of the barn, the heart of the heart. It rests where the summer sun sets. I walked over to the beam. It was huge, a solid piece of timber at least 2 feet thick, dark with age, and stained with the patina of 100 years. I ran my hands over it. The wood was rough, smelling faintly of pine sap. I followed the beam of light. It illuminated a small section of the wood, making the grain stand out. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't a carving. It wasn't a mark. It was a line. A perfectly straight, unnatural line in the ancient wood. A seam. My heart started to pound. I pressed on the wood around the seam. Nothing. I pushed. I pulled. It was solid. I took out my pocket knife, the one thing of my father's I still had, and carefully inserted the tip into the hairline crack. I levered it gently. There was a faint click, and a small section of the wood, no bigger than a shoebox, popped open a fraction of an inch. It wasn't a box hidden in the beam. It was a part of the beam itself, hollowed out with incredible precision. I pried the wooden door open. Inside, nestled in a space that had been painstakingly carved out, was a metal box. It was an old Army surplus ammunition can, painted black. On the top, in my grandfather's familiar, blocky handwriting, were 2 words: for Leo. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely lift the box out. It was heavy. I sat down on the floor of the hayloft, the box in my lap, the sunbeam illuminating the dust swirling around me. For a long time I just sat there, staring at it. This was it, the answer to the riddle: wood and iron and memory. I took a deep breath and unlatched the lid. The hinges creaked open. Inside, there was no deed, no legal document, Instead, it was a thick stack of letters, tied with twine, and a small, heavy leather pouch. I picked up the pouch first. It was soft with age. I pulled the drawstring, and a stream of gold coins poured into my palm. Old coins, heavy and real. There must have been 30 or 40 of them, a fortune. Beneath the pouch was a single, large, old-fashioned iron key. And then there were the letters. The paper was yellowed with age. The top one was addressed to me. I untied the twine, my fingers fumbling. The letter was dated just a month before he died. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, it means you came back. It means you didn't take the easy way out. It means you have more of your father in you than I even hoped. I knew they would try to buy you off. I knew they would try to scare you away. I'm sorry to have put you through this, but it was the only way. This ranch is more than just land, son. It's a story, and it's time you learned the truth." I just sat there for a moment, the pages shaking in my hand. The whole story of my life, the one I had been telling myself for years, was about to be rewritten. Have you ever had a moment like that? A single piece of information that changes everything you thought you knew, that re-oranges the entire landscape of your past. It's a terrifying and a powerful thing. If you know what I mean, let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories, your moments of truth, they matter. They remind all of us that we're not alone in these seismic shifts of the heart. Now, let's get back to that barn. I took a deep, shaky breath and continued reading. I have to tell you about your parents, and I have to tell you about your aunt and her husband. Your mother was the kindest soul I ever knew, but she always wanted to see the best in people, even when it wasn't there, especially when it came to her sister. Your uncle was a man with big dreams and no work ethic. He was always chasing the next get-rich-quick scheme, and your aunt always supported him. They were drowning in debt, and they came to your father for help. Your dad was a good man, Leo. Too good. He co-signed a loan for them, a big one, using his own small construction business as collateral. He wanted to help his family. He believed in them. But your uncle's business venture, like all the others, failed. And instead of declaring bankruptcy, they simply disappeared, leaving your father holding the bag. The bank came after him. It destroyed his business. It drained their savings. It put a strain on their marriage and on their health that you were too young to see. They were under incredible stress, driving back late one night from a meeting with a bankruptcy lawyer. Your dad was exhausted. He fell asleep at the wheel. The police report called it a tragic accident, and it was. But it was an accident that was pushed into happening. Your aunt and uncle never came to the funeral. They waited until the dust settled, and then they resurfaced, claiming they had no idea how bad things had gotten. They played the part of the grieving relatives perfectly. I could barely breathe. The words on the page were like punches to the gut. The accident. It had always been this shapeless, horrible tragedy in my mind, a random act of fate. But it wasn't random. It had a cause. It had a source. And that source was living in my house, eating my food, trying to steal my home. The letter continued. I could never prove it in a court of law, Leo. It was their word against a dead man's. But I knew. I knew what they did. After you were sent into the system, they came to me. They wanted the ranch. They said it was only fair, that they were your mother's only family. They saw this land not as a home, but as a cash machine. They wanted to sell it to developers who have been sniffing around this valley for years. I couldn't let that happen. This land was your birthright. So I made a plan. I wrote this will, knowing they would contest it, knowing they would see you as an obstacle, a problem to be bought off. I made them the caretakers because I wanted them right here, on this land, when you came back. I wanted them to have to look you in the eye. This isn't about revenge, son. It's about justice. It's about truth. What they took from your parents wasn't just money. It was their future. It was your future. The other letters in the box are the proof. Loan documents your father signed. Letters from the bank. A copy of a letter I sent to your uncle, begging him to do the right thing, which he never answered. It may not be enough for a criminal court, but Mr. Davies can use it to prove undue influence, to show a pattern of predatory behavior that makes their claim on this ranch a moral and legal travesty. The gold coins are for you. Your great-grandmother buried them during the Depression. They are outside the estate, beyond the reach of any court. Use them to hire the best lawyers, to fix the roof, to buy seeds. Use them to live. The iron key opens a safe deposit box in the bank in town. I don't know what's in it. Your father rented it a week before he died. He just told me, if anything ever happens to me, make sure Leo gets this key. He was planning something, trying to find a way out of the mess your uncle had made. You'll be the first person to see what he left behind. The choice is yours now, Leo. You can take this information, this money, and you can walk away. I wouldn't blame you if you did. Or you can stay. You can fight. You can reclaim the life they stole from you and your parents. You can make this place a home again. Whatever you do, know that I have always been proud of you. You are a thorn. You are a blackwood. You are stronger than you think. Your loving grandfather, Thomas. I cried. I sat in that dusty hayloft, the letter clutched in my hand, and I cried for the first time in years. Not just for my parents or my grandfather, but for the boy who had been so lost and alone, who had believed his family had abandoned him, that he was an inconvenience, a burden. I cried for the truth. It was a terrible, ugly truth, but it was the truth, and it set me free. The numbness that had coated my life for so long was gone, burned away by a clean, white-hot rage, and by a profound, aching love for a grandfather who had played a long, patient game of chess to ensure that one day I would have a chance at justice. The sun had set, and the barn was filled with deep shadows. I carefully packed everything back into the ammunition can. The weight of it felt different now. It wasn't just a box. It was my past and my future. It was my armor. I walked out of the barn and into the cool night air. The lights were on in the house. I could see their silhouettes moving behind the curtains. For days, that house had seemed like a fortress, impenetrable and hostile. Now, it just looked like a house they were trespassing in. I didn't go back to my cold little room. I walked up the front steps, across the porch where they had threatened me just days before, and I opened the front door without knocking. They were in the living room, watching TV. They both jumped when I came in, their faces a mixture of surprise and anger. The room was a mess. Beer cans and pizza boxes littered the coffee table. They had turned my grandparents' home into a sty. "What do you think you're doing?" Mark snarled, getting to his feet. I didn't say anything. I just walked over to the television and turned it off. The sudden silence was deafening. I placed the metal box on the coffee table with a heavy, definitive thud. "What's that?" David asked, his eyes narrowed, suspicious. "Justice," I said. My voice was calm, even. I had never felt so calm in my life. I opened the box and took out the thick stack of letters. I placed them on the table next to the box. "I know what you did," I said, looking from one of them to the other. "I know what you did to my father, to my mother." The color drained from their faces. Mark's bravado vanished, replaced by a pasty, slack-jawed fear. David just stared at the letters, his mind clearly racing, trying to figure out what I could possibly know. "It's over," I said. "The lying, the pretending, it's all over. You're not going to sell this land. You're not going to get another penny from my family. You have 24 hours to pack your things and get off my property." Mark found his voice, a weak, sputtering version of his usual bluster. You can't prove anything. It's our word against yours." "It's not my word," I said, tapping the letters. "It's my father's, and my grandfather's, and a pile of bank statements. My lawyer is going to have a very good time with these. But honestly, I'd rather not drag my parents' memory through a public court case. So I'm giving you a choice, the same choice you gave me. You can walk away, disappear, or you can stay. And I will use every last one of these gold coins to make sure the entire world knows exactly what kind of people you are." I opened the pouch and poured a few of the heavy gold coins onto the table. They gleamed in the lamplight, ancient and undeniable. David looked at the coins, then at the letters, then at me. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He was the smarter of the two. He knew when the game was up. He looked at his brother. "He's right," David said, his voice a dead monotone. "It's over. Pack your stuff." Mark looked like he was going to argue, like he wanted to fight, to break something. But the fight had gone out of him. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see a weak city kid he could bully. He saw someone who knew the truth. He saw his downfall. He just deflated, all the anger and arrogance draining out of him, leaving behind a bitter, defeated man. Without another word, he turned and left the room. I could hear him upstairs, slamming drawers, throwing things into a bag. I stood there as David watched me, his expression unreadable. There was no apology, no remorse, just a cold, hard assessment of his defeat. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "You have a pile of dirt and a broken-down house. You won't last a year." "Watch me," I said. The next morning, they were gone. The beat-up pickup truck was gone. The house was silent. I walked through the rooms. They had left them a mess, a final act of petty vandalism. But they were gone. I stood on the front porch, the same porch where they had threatened me, and watched the sunrise. The light crept over the hills, turning the sky pink and orange, chasing the shadows from the valley. It was the first sunrise of the rest of my life. The quiet was absolute. It wasn't the menacing silence of before. It was a peaceful silence, a silence filled with possibility. The air was crisp and clean. I took a deep breath. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. I was 18 years old. I was an orphan. And I was home. The first call I made was to Mr. Davies. I told him everything about the box, the letters, the coins, the key. He was quiet on the other end of the line for a long time. When he finally spoke, there was a warmth in his voice I hadn't heard before. "Your grandfather," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That magnificent, stubborn old man. He actually did it. He laid the perfect trap." He told me to bring the documents to his office as soon as I could. He said the letters provided clear evidence of a history of financial abuse and would be more than enough to have my cousin's frivolous lawsuit thrown out of court and to countersue for the emotional distress and the damage they had done to the property. The legal battle wasn't over, but the war was won. My next stop was the bank in town. It was a small, old-fashioned place with a marble floor and a teller behind a brass grill. I felt out of place in my dusty jeans and worn t-shirt. I asked for the bank manager, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Gable. I showed her the key and my ID. She looked at the key, then at me, her expression softening. "Thomas's grandson," she said. "We've been waiting for you." She led me back to the vault, a massive steel door with a wheel like a submarine hatch. She used her key, and I used mine. The door swung open with a heavy, satisfying click. The box was long and narrow. It wasn't filled with cash or jewels. It was filled with papers. But not legal papers. They were architectural drawings, blueprints. My father, the man I remembered as a broken-down contractor, had been planning to build his dream house, right here on the ranch. The blueprints were incredibly detailed. A beautiful, modern but rustic home, designed to sit on the very hill I had climbed, overlooking the valley. It was designed with passive solar heating, with a gray water recycling system, with materials sourced from the ranch itself. It was a house meant to live in harmony with the land. Tucked in with the blueprints was a business plan. He had been planning to pivot his company from small-time renovations to building sustainable, eco-friendly homes. This house was to be his prototype, his showcase. He hadn't been broken. He had been on the verge of a breakthrough. He was trying to build a new future for us, right here, on the land that had been in our family for generations. And tucked into the very back of the box was a small, spiral-bound notebook. It was my mother's. It was a garden journal, page after page of her beautiful handwriting, detailing plans for the ranch. Restoring the heritage orchard, planting a massive vegetable garden, creating a wildflower meadow for the native bees. Her dream wasn't about money, it was about life, about growth, about healing the land. I sat in that sterile, air-conditioned room in the bank vault and saw my parents more clearly than ever before. They weren't just victims. They were dreamers. They were builders, and their dreams hadn't died with them. They were right here, in my hands, waiting. The weeks that followed were the hardest and best of my life. I started the work. I started with the house. I aired it out, scrubbed it from top to bottom, getting rid of the stale energy of my cousin's occupation. I patched the cracked window in my little room. I fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen. Small things, but they were a start. Each small act of repair felt like I was repairing a part of myself. I took the gold coins and opened a bank account. I paid Mr. Davies a retainer. I hired a local guy, an old ranch hand named Sal, who had worked for my grandfather for 30 years before my cousins fired him. Sal was in his 70s, with a face like a road map and hands like leather. He knew every inch of this ranch. He knew which fences needed mending first, how to clear the irrigation ditches, which of the old apple trees in the orchard could be saved. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he told me stories about my grandfather, about his stubbornness, his kindness, his love for this land. Through Sal's stories, my grandfather became more than a ghost, more than a strategic genius. He became a man I wished I had gotten to know better. Together, Sal and I began to bring the ranch back to life. It was back-breaking work. We spent weeks clearing brush and mending fences. We pruned the old apple trees, hoping for a harvest. We tilled a small patch of land near the house for a vegetable garden, following the plans in my mother's journal. I was tired every night, my muscles aching in ways I didn't know was possible. But it was a good tired. It was the ache of creation, of building something. I was sleeping in the main house now, in my grandparents' old room. The bed was comfortable. the room filled with the faint scent of lavender from the sachets my grandmother had tucked into the drawers years ago. Some nights, I would take my father's blueprints and my mother's journal out onto the porch and just sit there, under a canopy of stars so bright they felt like you could reach out and touch them. I wasn't just reclaiming a piece of property. I was picking up the threads of my parents' dreams. The ranch wasn't an inheritance. It was a responsibility. It was a promise to them, to my grandfather, and to myself. A promise to build something that would last. The legal case ended not with a bang, but a whimper. Faced with the mountain of evidence, my cousins dropped their suit. Mr. Davies, true to his word, filed a countersuit for damages, and the court awarded me a settlement that would cover the cost of the most urgent repairs the ranch needed. I never saw Mark or David again. I heard they left the state, chasing some other scheme, leaving behind a trail of bad debts. They were a part of my past, a chapter I could finally close. Life settled into a new rhythm, marked by the seasons. The first green shoots in my mother's garden, the blossoms on the apple trees, the return of the summer sun. The ranch was slowly healing, and so was I. The loneliness I had felt so acutely was replaced by a sense of purpose. I wasn't alone. I had Sal, I had Mr. Davies, and I had the community of the small town, which slowly began to accept me. People who had known my grandparents would stop by, sharing memories, offering advice. They saw that I was serious, that I wasn't some developer looking to pave over their valley. They saw that I was one of them. One evening, I was up on the hill, the spot where my father had planned to build his house. I was looking down at the valley, at the lights of my own home twinkling in the twilight. The barn roof was still sagging, the fields were still a patchwork of weeds and progress, but it was alive. It was mine, and I finally understood what my grandfather meant. The true deed wasn't paper. It was the wood of the barn, the iron of the tools in the workshop, the memory of 4 generations who had poured their sweat and their love into this soil. It was the work of my own 2 hands. It was the feeling of belonging to a place, and a place belonging to you. I had come here as a scared, angry kid with nothing but a duffel bag and a chip on my shoulder. And this place, this land, this legacy of love and struggle had given me a future. It had given me back my past. It had shown me who I was. This land isn't just dirt and fences. It's a second chance. And that's what I want to leave you with. The biggest lesson I learned in all of this. No matter what system tried to define you, what label they tried to put on you, what story they told you about yourself, you get to write the ending. You get to decide who you are. Your past doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a foundation. If this story meant something to you, if it resonated with that part of you that knows what it's like to fight for your place in the world, please subscribe and share it. Let's keep telling stories about finding home in all the places and all the ways we thought it was lost. And please, tell me your story in the comments. What inheritance, not of money, but of strength or wisdom, has shaped you? I'll be reading. You are not alone.